Welcome to Wealth Strategies Unleashed with Concenture Wealth Management. I'm Robert Gilliland, and today we have with us
Karen Hyder.
Awesome. Hey, Karen, thanks for joining us. And before we got started, I think it's really great. I'm a huge fan of dad jokes.
Uh-oh.
And you broke out with a great dad joke this morning, and I just think that to start today off, I think it would be great for you to go with. So would you please share that?
I would love to. This is the corniest of corny joke, but what do two French fries do when they get together?
I don't know what.
Ketchup. It's one of my favorites.
Perfect dad joke. I probably will be using it around the dinner table. I think that's a great way to start. So, hey, what I thought we would do, because as we get towards summer, people start going on vacations, and as you're longer in your career, you start thinking, hey, retirement's around the corner. I think I'm ready to get real serious about retirement, and not get serious about it, but what does retirement look like? How do I create that paycheck and stuff like that? And probably what makes sense is to kind of go through and kind of chat a little bit about the different types of strategies that people should think about when it comes to retirement. And so, as we're doing that, and we hear a lot of people, and there's a lot of white papers out there around this thing called the 4% rule.
That's the most common. That's the one that you typically hear from friends, neighbors, etc. But basically, that strategy is taking 4% out of your portfolio every year and sticking with that percentage.
So if I had $1 million, I could take $40,000 a year out. And what are some disadvantages of that 4% rule?
Yeah, there's a few. So one being the 4%, while that percentage stays fixed, the dollar amount doesn't. So if we look at coming off of a bad year, well, now your 4% dollar amount is less than what it was the year before. So if you're sticking with a strategy like that, that assumes that you were able to change your lifestyle and change how much you're taking out to live on year by year. It's going to be a fluctuating number.
Yeah, one thing that when people come to that, and there's tons of white papers out there that say it, whether it's 4 or 3.5, and I've even seen some that said 2.5's enough, right? Or more than 2.5. The problem is that $1 million that you're taking 40, it doesn't really take into account inflation.
No, it doesn't.
Right?
Especially in periods like we've been the last few years, that would be very hard to stick with and keep up with inflation if you're following that rule. And
the other strategy would be a fixed amount. I have $1 million. I'm going to take $30,000 no matter what. And the thing that we know is that the markets don't always go up. So if we have this massive drawdown taking a fixed amount, then you could end up doing a lot of harm.
You could end up taking too much out of your portfolio in any one year, but I think the even bigger problem with that one is that doesn't take into account life. So you may have a year where $30,000 has worked great for 10 years in a row, but now something big happens and you have an emergency and you need more than $30,000. That could be detrimental to your portfolio if you've been sticking with that $30,000 every year. So it doesn't give the flexibility that takes into account life needs that happen.
One of the things also that we see a lot is people who they've got to, let's stick with that hypothetical $1 million. They're like, I want to live off of interest and dividends, right? And the thing that we saw, that people who had that type of strategy, interest rates now are much higher, so it makes it a little bit more palatable. But when we had interest rates at 2%, and you were just going to live off of that, so I'm going to put it into bonds or I'm going to put it in there, but interest rates are so low, you're kind of locking in at a low rate. But then when interest rates go up and those bond or interest rates go up, you're stuck at that 2. But then on the other side is what happens when interest rates start to drop, and now you are having bonds come due, or those investments come due that have to be reinvested in order to create that income. Now you're locking it in at a lower rate.
Absolutely.
The other problem is like if you're going to focus only on dividends, right? Companies' dividends are not guaranteed. Sure, we've got a lot of companies that have paid them for their whole life, but you could end up being 15 years down the road not accounting for inflation and not have enough income.
Exactly. You face a company that's now cut their dividend, or even worse, does away with paying a dividend at all, and that's something you've been relying on for a number of years. That can be detrimental.
So there's a strategy and I'm really interested to hear you kind of walk us through that we have found that has created, that we utilize, that's really taken away that risk. I think that people, when they're thinking about retirement, there are several things that concern them. One of them is healthcare. That's probably number one. How am I going to pay for insurance, healthcare in there? But the other is how do I create that paycheck that I'm used to receiving every 2 weeks or every month? Talk to us about.
Yep, so that's where our team strategy comes into play. We've actually developed a strategy among our team that has worked over a number of years, and we call it our dynamic age approach. And the age is actually an acronym, so the A and the G and the E each stand for something. So you want to walk us through those letters?
Yeah, I got to think through this. The A stands for adaptable, right? Because the income need that you have right here, right now, may change. Or it may go up or it may go down. So we need to have the flexibility to adapt. G stands for growth. We have to stay ahead of inflation. We have to have these assets grow. We have to make sure that we have the funds that are available when you need them. And the E is ensure. Ensure that that's available. So our strategy, the AGE, it has to be adaptable. It has to be able to, we have to account for growth, and we have to ensure that those funds are available when you need them as we're going through in the planning.
Exactly. So with those three pillars in mind, what we do is we basically segment the funds out into three different boxes, with each box having its own time frame and its own goal of what we're trying to accomplish. So we start with our short-term income, which is our first 5 years, so years 1 to 5. The purpose of this box is not to have a huge amount of growth. It's all about guarantees and security. So these are in very boring investments that are simply designed to have the cash available without market risk or any concern that those funds are going to decrease. So it's all about guarantees in that box. In our middle box, you want to talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah, real quick. One thing I would say about that first one is that what we know when this is set up, the next 5 years worth of income is locked in. We know exactly where and what that is.
Exactly.
Then we know we've spent that money in the first 5 years. That leads us to our next box. That we call that the income replacement box. And in that income replacement box, those funds are designed to last us for years 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Well, we can add that number up with what we need. We know what that is. But because we have a 5-year time horizon, we can take just a very, very, very little amount of risk. So we can account for a very, very, very conservative amount of growth. So that means that if we need in that 6 through 10 years, we need $250,000 beginning in year 6, we can actually invest a lower amount knowing that we're going to have a high degree of confidence of growing that money to the $250,000. So that gets us there. From there, we go into the...
Everything else is in the long-term growth bucket. So knowing what we've set aside in our first short-term income bucket and our income replacement, that leaves all the rest of the funds to be dedicated towards growth. And since we don't need those funds for 10 years, that allows us to be a little bit more aggressive in that box, very much being smart about the risk that we're taking and how we're allocated, but it allows those funds 10 years in the market to grow. We're okay taking some risk and accepting a certain level of volatility, knowing that growth is in mind and we have time on our side for those funds to grow. And that allows us with a reasonable growth rate to a lot of the times get back to close to where we started at the end of those 10 years.
You know what's amazing is that when you walk through this plan, you've gone through and you've done your financial planning the best you possibly can. The beautiful part about setting up your assets this way is that you now have flexibility and freedom.
Yep.
Right? Because by setting it up this way, you now have the ability every single year to do a temperature check. Do I need more? Do I need less? Am I on track? Do we need to adjust the risk? The thing that I have found that's been really, it's really gratifying utilizing this strategy with clients, and that when they come in and we very first start, they're really worried about how do we create that paycheck. And now that they know that they got 5 years, now that when you have a little bit of market volatility, as long as the fundamental reasons for the investments in this long-term growth have not changed, it gives us time. And we have clients who in the tech bubble busting and in the great financial crisis, what ended up happening is that they had peace of mind that they didn't have to worry about selling their assets, selling things at low prices in order to meet their cash flow. We already had it all set up. They were able to sleep better at night, and there was a huge relief to them. They didn't like, no one likes being down because everything was down, but they knew that, hey, look, I don't have to get out on the side of the road and start collecting cans. I'm okay.
Well, exactly. Having that peace of mind, knowing that you have time for those assets to recover and that doesn't affect your own lifestyle or your ability to continue to receive that paycheck from your assets, there's so much to be said for that.
Yeah, and I think that when you go in and you sit down, you build out that plan, you're very comprehensive in the way that you look at it. You account for being able to travel or being able to do this or being able to do that. It gives you the ability to be able to fund those goals that you want to do.
Yep.
And when you have that peace of mind, one thing that we know is, and there's lots of studies out there, is that the people who have the greatest happiness in retirement know exactly where that income is going to come from. And and you see it on our clients' faces when we're doing it.
Absolutely.
And so with that, just to kind of rehash, you got the 4% rule. That way you know exactly where it is, but there's issues with it. The consistent withdrawal rate, there's some issues with that. There's the just living off of dividends or income that it produces. You're kind of locked in. And any sort of good income plan needs to have guarantees, needs to have opportunities for growth, and probably most importantly, needs to ensure those funds are available with you, right?
Exactly.
And so with that, I'd like to say thank you for joining us. I hope there were some pieces in here that made sense. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.